you, Mr. Speaker. It is far too common for members of Congress to come to the floor of this chamber, to weave their narrative of incompetent federal bureaucracies, lazy and unresponsive members of the unionized federal workforce, and greedy and irresponsible federal contractors. I rise today to tell a very different story. On September 26, 2014, commercial flights in nearly every airport around this country were delayed or canceled after a Chicago Route Air Traffic Control Center, also known as Chicago Center, in Aurora, Illinois, was disabled in an act of sabotage by a disturbed individual. A fire destroyed the communications equipment that processes flight plan data, and it enabled air traffic controllers at the facility to communicate with pilots in the 91,000 square miles of airspace for which they are responsible. This could have led to tragic loss of life. However, due to the efforts of controllers at Chicago Center and adjacent air traffic control facilities, all planes in the air when Chicago Center lost communications were landed safely. Nearly 200 of the controllers at Chicago Center then traveled to 12 air traffic control towers and terminal radar approach controls throughout the Midwest to help direct air traffic. At the same time, technicians, mechanics, and electricians were working around the clock to replace damaged equipment and restore the Chicago Center facilities. In total, they replaced 10 miles of cable, dozens of racks of computers, and 835 communication circuits to restore the center's voice communications, radar, flight planning, and weather capabilities. As a scientist who has installed giant experiments and accelerators on tight time scales, I respect what they accomplished. Professional restoration crews also removed fire, soot, smoke, and water damage from the affected areas. And all of this was accomplished in just over 2 weeks. Despite significant challenges, Chicago airports were able to operate at more than 90% capacity within days of the fire. 1 week after the fire, Administrator Huerta visited Chicago Center with me and my colleagues in the Senate to assess the progress of the restoration. And while it was clear that the damage had been extensive, I drew confidence from what I saw. Everyone understood what they needed to do for the sake of the traveling public. They set an aggressive schedule for repairs, and they kept it. The air traffic controllers, FAA employees, and contractors who responded to this crisis performed admirably and deserve our sincere thanks and appreciation. Under difficult circumstances, members of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association from throughout the Midwest rose to the challenge and kept the flying public safe. Within 4 days of the fire, O'Hare Airport regained its title as the busiest airport in the world. I would like to say a special thank you to Toby Houck, the Chicago Center NATCA facility representative, Jerry Wolasik, the Chicago Center Pass facility representative, Bill Cound, the Chicago Center air traffic manager, Mike Paulson, the Chicago Center technical operations group manager, and everyone else who worked to restore Chicago Center. Because of all of you, by October 13th, repairs were completed and Chicago Center returned to full capacity. But important lessons have been learned. That the fire that crippled Chicago Center not only affected flights departing and arriving in the Midwest, but also those flying throughout Chicago's airspace to reach their destinations. Between Friday and Sunday, more than 3,000 flights were canceled at O'Hare alone. The estimated cost to the airlines has been reported to be more than $350 million in total. However, what made this crisis unique wasn't the number of delays or canceled flights. It was that just one person was able to disrupt the travel plans of so many thousands of people. The systems that protect the flying public must be made more robust. Although the fundamental redundancy had been built into the system, the ability for nearby radar systems to see into the Chicago airspace, the FAA must and is improving contingency plans to restore service much faster than it was able to do. And in the long term, the best way to ensure the safety and reliability of the national airspace system is to facilitate the transition to next-gen air traffic transportation system. Currently, the ground-based radar system is the foundation of national airspace systems. Next-gen will rely on GPS satellites that are more accurate than ground-based radar. It will also include a transition from radio voice communications to a digital network that is similar to the mobile phone service. This transition to Next Gen will enable air traffic controllers to reestablish air traffic control services much more quickly after this type of disaster. I urge my colleagues to join me in commending the FAA's response team on a job well done and to support the President's request for full funding for implementing Next Gen in the 114th Congress. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman's